I don't know why it isn't working. HDMI 3, right?
Well, this morning you
It
had
was fine.
hooked up into.
Yeah, and I tried that and it didn't work. So now I'm trying this. Let's try it this way. I'm wondering if you need to toggle the switch over there a little bit. Working. HDMI 3. So that's good. Oh, very good. Okay, welcome everybody. We are going to be getting started in just a minute. We have some friends on YouTube joining us and on Zoom, and just waiting for a couple of people to come in the room, and we're going to get going. All right, we got some people live here in Palo Alto, and we have some people on Zoom. Hi, Melanie. There may be a few people who join us, but we're going to get going right away because we have a lot to cover. All right, so this is a class about disclosure packages. This class, I think, is a really good supplement to the disclosure class that Eddie or Jean teaches, the broker teaches. This is a more of an overview of how to manage actual real life disclosure packages that you encounter. Either you're going to create them for your sellers, you're going to create them for your buyers. So we're going to talk today about disclosure packages. What are they? Who prepares them? Where do you find them? We're going to talk about the minimum requirement for a disclosure package. We're going to talk about what I call bonus disclosures. I want to spend some time talking about our role as real estate agents and give you guys some tips on how to prepare disclosures and how to review disclosures. And there'll be a chance for questions too. So it's a full hour, so we're going to get right into it. So a disclosure package. Okay, for those of you who are in the room, you're seeing all these overlays here and they're annoying. Okay, what is a disclosure package? So simply put, it is a collection of documents. It is that are offered by the seller, usually via their real estate agent. You don't normally get disclosures directly from the seller. They come via the agent that is representing them and selling their home. Why? Why do we have disclosure packages? Well, they allow the seller to meet the requirements of the purchase agreement, which makes specific reference to them, meet the requirement of the law, and reduce the seller's risk. Why does the existence of a good disclosure package reduce the seller's risk? Risk of what?
Most of the information what he knows, he disclosed already. So there is no way that, I mean, if he disclosed whatever the requirements are and whatever he is aware of, then there is a less chance of liability and later that somebody come back, oh, you didn't tell.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. When the seller completes the disclosure package, they are reducing the likelihood of getting sued or your agent getting sued. Remember that sellers have an obligation to disclose everything they know about the condition of the property that might be material for a buyer. Everything they know that would affect the value or desirability of a property must be disclosed by law.
Yeah.
And so even if a seller fills out a form and says, I don't know about this, that's better than silence.
Yeah.
And so these are very, very important part of the real estate transaction is that we do this disclosure obligation. So it is about liability. Now, in the old days, we would get a UPS package or we would go to the office of the listing agent and pick up a big envelope that had hundreds of printed pages. Then they started sending them as PDFs and as attachments and links in the MLS to PDFs or to a shared drive. But in the last 3 years, it's become much, much more uniform, at least here in Northern California in the Bay Area, to use the web portal called HomeLight. HomeLight used to be called Disclosures.io. But HomeLight is a third-party company that provides this service of putting disclosures online. There is a free version that many agents use, and then there is the paid version. The advantage of the paid version for a listing agent is they can actually see who viewed their listing and who opened, downloaded disclosures, and offers can be submitted directly using that tool. But but at the very least, many agents use the free version to have a nice one place for all of these documents. And these documents are typically PDFs. They might be start out as Word docs or other types of worksheets or stuff, but they end up being easily accessible, and it's kind of transparent what kind of document it was. And HomeLight is the service we use. So it looks like this. What you're looking at is a HomeLight dashboard page. Or actually, I apologize, the page for a specific property. Now, this is a page for a specific property. Look at all those black areas. That is redacted because I don't want to share information here about a specific client, right? So you have a property address map, and then where that big rectangle is the address, and then all the documents go down the page. And notice there's a section for documents. If you have you can see the viewers who went and looked at them, activity, messages, offers, settings. It's a pretty powerful tool. And the pro version is the paid version that you would pay for to. Anyway, that's what it looks like. So what is required? So sellers have an obligation to provide documents that are, number one, contractually required. The contract, the residential purchase agreement, says that you have to include these documents. And if you've taken the residential purchase agreement class, you may remember. I'm going to show you some of it, but the document has got a lot of detail about what documents are included. In addition to stuff that is contractually required, there is stuff that the law says, state law, state of California law says you have to include. That's called statutorily. Okay, it is required by law. In these cases, the contract may or may not make specific reference to it, but you still have to provide those disclosures. Number three, there are documents that are required by the California Association of Realtors if you are a realtor selling a house. And the brokerage you work with, as licensed sales agents, you are not an independent broker. Your broker may have standards of practice that they provide additional documents that they want every listing they sell to include for their own risk management, going beyond what is required by the contract, going beyond what is required by the law. So that are the three levels of things that are going to be required. So you might be asking, oh my goodness, how do I know what to do? But before I get there, I want to point out that the contract defines when these documents have to be provided. Okay? Even though our common practice in the Bay Area is to have the disclosure package on hand and ready before you even go on the market, that is not what the contract says. The sales contract gives a date, and I'll show you in a minute, that the seller must provide all the required documents by. And that is the seller's legal commitment. They have to provide the documents by X date, even though there is a standard of practice. So if you're a buyer's agent and there are no disclosures before the offer is accepted, the seller hasn't done anything wrong. It's just their agent did not, for whatever reason, feel it was uploaded the documents. Okay, maybe they haven't collected them yet. Whatever. There's no legal bearing here. Yes.
So if putting an offer and you don't have a disclosure package in front of you, so we should put the contingencies for that particular cases.
If you are representing a buyer
yeah.
and there's no disclosures, there's a number of issues there. One is you certainly want to make the seller committed in the contract when they're going to deliver them.
Yeah.
the legally required ones. But it also opens the door for a buyer's agent to ask for an investigation contingency so that they have adequate time to do the researches around them. We'll talk about that in a minute. The responsibility of the listing agent is to make sure that they provide all the legally required documents by the deadline in the contract. That's it. The responsibility of the buyer's agent is to make sure that all of the legally required documents are received by the deadlines. So if you're representing a seller and the contract says you have to have everything in by day 3, you got to get in by day 3. If you're representing the buyer, you're going to be calling the listing agent, hey, these documents are due today. Where are these documents? That's the way it works. Okay.
If didn't get it, then the offer rejected. I mean,
No, well, if you're in contract, it creates all kinds of cancellation rights,
yes,
but it doesn't void the contract right away. So a buyer would give a seller a notice to perform. There's a whole process for when one side doesn't do what they're supposed to do. Okay. So here is where it is in the contract. This is on, I think, page 2. It's at the bottom of page, it's part of page 2, section 3N1. Seller in the contract, delivery of documents. The contract says 7 days. And notice that in this example, we wrote in 3 days. Why would we write in 3 days? Why would we change it? If we're a buyer's agent and writing an offer, why would we change it from 7 to 3 days?
creating more strict guidelines, or maybe like we need it faster.
Why would we need it faster?
Why to waste time if there is something we have to work on?
So the reason why we sometimes tighten this time frame is if we already have a full disclosure package, so there's no need to allow more time. But more importantly, if we have a short closing,
Yeah,
if we have a short closing, we don't want to wait a week for them to deliver documents. If there's any missing documents, we want them within 1 or 2 or 3 days. So that's what that says. Then there is section L5. Section L5, this is a contingency section, 3L5. Notice we have our investigation contingency up higher, 3L3, but there is a separate contingency for review of seller documents, and it defaults to 17 days. And again, you can change it to be later. So if you are representing a buyer and you don't want to scare the seller away by having the investigation contingency, maybe they provided an excellent home inspection and they provided an excellent pest inspection, but you haven't had a chance to read over the documents. Your buyer hasn't had a chance to properly review all the disclosures. Maybe there are hundreds of pages of them. You might request this contingency. Mr. Seller, we need 17 days, or maybe you change it to 5 days or 10 days to properly review all your documents. So it is a separate standalone contingency. It is not part of the investigation contingency. Now, there's something very interesting here that a lot of people miss. 17 days after acceptance or 5 days after delivery, whichever is later. Okay, so let us imagine we have a difficult deal and you represent the buyer and it's day 15 of 17 before they give you the documents. You no longer have 17 days to review them as a buyer's agent. As a buyer, you have 22 days, or 20 actually, because it adds 5 days after delivery, whichever is later. So if day 17 falls on a Friday and you don't get the documents till that Friday, you have 5 days of review. The buyer is still in contract. The seller is still in compliance. But if you're a listing agent, you're never going to want to deliver the documents that late. You don't want to give the buyer more time. You want the buyer to adhere to the original deadlines. So it's very important. Okay. What are some of the typical seller disclosures? It's a question for you guys. And you on Zoom, you guys can chime in, just talk. What are some of the typical disclosures?
Investigation, pests,
Yes, yes,
Home inspections,
yes. What else?
typical. Typical ones, but there are roofs and all the other specific ones.
Okay, so Melanie is talking
Foundations.
about home and pest inspection and roof inspection. Actually, they are a special category of reports. Ruchi here in the room said, what did you say?
The report which we get it from the title
The
company.
preliminary title
Oh,
report.
yeah.
That is a typical report. Yes, a preliminary title report. So I'm really glad Melanie brought up inspections because it raises an interesting point, which I'm going to go into now. These lists here are the reports that are typically required. These are typical. These are not, it's not a for sure list. It is also not in every case, right? But these are the typical ones, the ones we expect from a fair disclosure report. TDS, excuse me, transfer disclosure statement. SPQ, seller property questionnaire. The listing agent, AVID, agent visual inspection disclosure. By the way, you don't have to take a lot of notes because you can get this whole, there's a link at the end of the presentation for you to order the whole thing. Plus the audio will be on my YouTube channel. There's a lead-based paint disclosure if the house was built before 78, that's usually required. Preliminary title report, Ruchi mentioned that, typically required. NHD report, that's natural hazard disclosure. This is like, is it in an earthquake zone? Is it in a fire zone? Is it in a flood zone? If there is an HOA documents are expected and required. And legacy reports are expected and required. If your seller has reports from when they bought the house, those reports and disclosures also are expected and required by buyers. Those are the ones that are expected. So the question is, when would these standard disclosures not be required and how would you know? How do you, this is getting to what I was talking about before, how would you even know? Like you have my little list here, but sometimes these reports aren't required and sometimes they are. How would you possibly know? Before I tell you guys the answer, does anyone want to guess? How would you find out?
During offer, we don't require, we can put the contingency, but later we.
Oh, but your seller's agent say. Or you're a buyer's agent and you want to make sure nothing's missing that's legally required. How do you research that?
We'll ask the agent, seller agent
What if they don't know? What if they're not competent and they're not doing their job right?
from the city.
That's city, but what about stuff from the state? What about stuff from the brokerages? So the answer, there's two answers.
Oh.
Number one, the California Association of Realtors website will cover required documents from the contract and from the law. So if you click on this link, it takes us to the CIR website and to a document when it finishes loading called, sorry, it's taking so long to load. I should have had this loaded before I started. I think I'm logged in. We'll know in a minute. I'm not logged in. Okay. It takes us to a document called the sales. This link takes us right to the sale disclosure checklist. Statutory or contractually required disclosures. And it goes through every one of them, including some I didn't even mention. Pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
This is right there for you guys. Okay, this is the sale disclosure checklist. Okay, there are other disclosure charts too. There's the lease rental disclosure chart, the new home disclosure chart, the REO, that's a foreclosure sale. Very, very helpful stuff, all on CAR. But that's not your only source of information, guys. There is another source, and that is the broker files. Each of your offices, you have your agent portal. You might remember the agent portal is where you go to get documents for the coaching program and where you go to get marketing support. But the agent portal has a whole section of legal and compliance. And our brokers take great pains to make sure it's up to date with the latest, here's what your file has to have. And this is a great help for us. Compliance and forms, right here, right at the very top in this particular portal. There's also legal and compliance at the bottom with even more support. At different offices, it's in a different place. Like in the Oakland Market Center, it's under the heading of legal compliance / resources. But wherever it is, it's pretty easy to find, and it is the next place to go. Now, third place, if you still are confused, is talk to the broker. You can ask your mentors. There's nothing wrong with asking your mentors. But what I would say about that is your mentors sometimes don't know either. So your broker is the definitive source. So you might go to your mentor and they may say, that's a great question. We have to ask Gene or Eddie. For those of you on the call, Gene Gallagher is the broker for Palo Alto and San Francisco and Burlingame Peninsula States. And Eddie Moran is the broker of record for Oakland and Fremont, or KW East Bay and Fremont offices. So that's how you find out. Okay, so guys, when you represent a seller or a buyer, there is no excuse not to do the disclosure package professionally and correctly. All right, here's a link, a picture of that CAR website I was showing you. So there are some exceptions that are pretty well known where certain documents don't require. There's something called exempt sellers. So sometimes you have a sale with a trust or a probate or a foreclosure. Those are the standard exception worlds. But again, you go to the CAR website, you go to the broker, you'll know exactly what to do. When in doubt, after all that, ask your mentor, ask me, ask your managing broker or compliance officer. Worst case, contact our legal counsel. That's what they can also help with stuff like this, BRLG. Now, someone at the beginning, it was Melanie, talked about inspection reports. A lot of people don't realize that these are bonuses. The seller is not legally obligated to provide any inspector reports from third parties. They're not required to give you permit history. They're not required to show invoices of all the activities. Those are all bonuses. They're not required to have a seller love letter. Lately, you see a lot of sellers. We lived in this home for 30 years and we raised our family here and it was great. And we hope the new owner really appreciates the wonderful coffee shop at the end of Main Street, all that stuff. Also, some brokerages have all kinds of disclosures that they put in the package. It is not necessarily documents that when you're representing the buyer side need to be signed. So you will encounter circumstances where brokers say they won't sign KW documents, or KW says we won't sign that brokerage's documents. And there's technical reasons why we don't have time to get into, but all of this stuff is bonus.
But why did the seller do that?
Why would the seller provide bonus disclosures? Because sellers know that if they provide a good home and pest inspection and maybe a roof inspection and maybe a foundation engineer report and maybe a mold inspection, blah, blah, blah. Maybe if they do all these things, they reduce the risk of a buyer having an investigation contingency or canceling the deal using an investigation contingency. So if the buyer has an investigation contingency and they find out there's a crack in the foundation that wasn't previously known, they'll cancel the deal and get their deposit back and sellers back to square one, has to go back on the market. If the seller provided a foundation report and talked about that crack and had a price for repair, no buyer is going to write an offer if they don't like that. So it serves the seller very well to provide a home and pest inspection. This is a relatively new phenomenon. 10, 15 years ago, sellers didn't want to do this, but they have learned in our sophisticated market that too many deals were falling through because the buyer would bring in their inspector and find all kinds of stuff like, dry rot and termites and stuff like that. Now, doing these reports as a bonus disclosure doesn't guarantee the seller that a deal won't fall through. And all buyer's agents will have an investigation inspection if they are usually will almost always have one if they're the only offer, or if they're trying to write preemptively or something, they'll have it in there because they want to protect their buyer. But you can really help reduce the seller's risk of the deal falling out. But the failure to provide one does not invalidate the disclosure package. It doesn't mean they've done anything wrong. They've just perhaps marketed the property in a way that was suboptimal in our environment. In our environment, it is so suboptimal that it's going to it's going to bother the buyer's agent. The buyer's agent says, where's the home inspection report? Where's the pest inspection report? You will still see plenty of disclosure packages where they don't have one or both. You just need to adjust accordingly with your offers. So what is the role of the agent? So we help sellers understand their legal disclosure obligations. And thank goodness there's a form for that. We're going to talk about the form. We help buyer clients understand the nature of the disclosures they've been sent and encourage them to review them. We never tell sellers what they should write or answer on any disclosure form. Sometimes you've seen disclosure form where the seller is, if you're representing a buyer, you get the disclosure package, you see handwritten answers and stuff, or you see clearly, explanations of things. We are not to tell the seller the words to write or how to answer the questions. What we can say to the seller is what it means, what the question is asking. All of these seller questions are in the form of, are you aware, Mr. Seller? So the seller may not be aware in good faith of something that's really happening. That's what they're reporting when they answer, no, I am not aware. If they answer yes to a question, explanation is required. Another no-no. You should never tell a buyer, oh, this is not important, but this is. Never use language like that. Never say to a buyer, I found these 3 things that are super important. You can ignore the rest of the disclosure package. No, you should never say that. Okay. We're going to get into that a little bit more. Couple of alerts. Special alert number 1. This is to this point. All disclosures are important. You want to have your clients ask you questions first before you start telling them about all the things you found when you did your review of the disclosures for them. So before you meet with a buyer to write an offer or remove contingencies, you're going to do a disclosure review. That's kind of a standard. You want to go sit down with them and go over disclosures, especially if they're a first-time buyer. But in any case, you don't want the conversation to go something like, okay, Mr. Buyer, here are 10 things you need to know about. And then that's the call. No. The first thing that needs to happen is, Mr. Buyer, tell me everything you read. What did you read? What did you think? Okay. And don't let it go when they say, oh, I didn't have a chance to. Reschedule the meeting. Okay. They're the ones spending the millions of dollars. They're the ones putting down all this money and taking the big financial risk. It's important they read what they're buying. Okay. Buying a home is complicated, and these disclosures are going to require a little bit of focused attention, but they have to give it a shot. Okay. And why do we make a big deal about this? Because what you as agents focus on may not be important to your client, your buyer client. Or you might, more serious, you might say, oh, this is nothing. I'm not worried about this. And it might be critical. They might have had some traumatic thing happen where they need to make sure that all the electrical wiring is grounded in the house. And you may think that's far less important than the foundation crack and the leak in the roof. And you might say, buyer, pay attention to the leak in the roof, pay attention to the foundation crack. But in the meantime, they had some trauma around a fire 30 years ago because the wiring wasn't grounded. You didn't say anything about the grounding. They didn't read the report, and the whole thing blows up later when they find out there are ungrounded lines in the house, which is very common in older housing. So avoid putting yourself at risk. Make it clear to your buyer clients that they should review the disclosures and bring to you their questions, concerns, issues. They will have questions. I don't even know what this means. Can you explain to me what this form means? That's okay. That's alert number 1. Alert number 2. We're moving into a new world. We have these AIs. We can upload the whole disclosure package there, and have AI tell us what's important. So just remember and tell your clients that they don't, these analyses tools don't do well with handwritten documents, of which you will find some in a disclosure package. They don't do well with faded documents, copied documents, scanned documents, anything that's not formatted like text on white paper kind of deal. And they don't do particularly well yet with images. Those are pretty significant downfalls. But I would say the third problem, the third bullet here, is the most important problem. Your AI that your client uses may not know what is important to your client. And your client may not be able to tell the AI what's important to them. So it's the usefulness of the AI is limited. So be wary about it. That doesn't mean it isn't going to be a resource. It might be even a resource for you. I'm not saying you shouldn't take a look, but it is certainly not an excuse for you not to read the package, right? That's really bad, because you need to learn what's in these things as real estate experts. Anyway,
Even I go through, but I do send it to Gemini to just make sure I didn't miss anything. Or
that you felt was important.
something which I might not understand, and
Okay.
Gemini can explain better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So-
Yeah. As long as you don't rely on it, I'm not going to be so like old fashioned as to say you shouldn't use them. And they are getting better. Part of the skill we offer buyers is the ability to help our buyers know what's important to our buyers and help our buyers to self-identify what's important so that they can make good decisions. The AIs will never be able to do that. Okay, next question. What can you do to make disclosure preparation for your sellers and review easier for your buyers? What can you do? Number 1, determine the required and optional disclosures necessary for serving your seller's needs before you go on the market, right? Review the disclosure information advisory with your client, the seller. Do not tell the seller how to complete the forms, but if asked, do provide resources on how to learn what the questions mean, or tell them what the questions mean if it's obvious to you. And number 4, assemble and upload the forms to your disclosures portal before you go on the market. Those are 4 key things. So this is the disclosure information advisory for sellers. This is a great, great document. I recommend you share it with all of your sellers before you ask them to fill out the forms. So if you're working with one of our transaction coordinators, they're terrific. They're going to open a pre-escrow for you for your seller as soon as you have your listing, and they will send a Glide link so that people can start filling. Glide is an app. So they can start filling them in using a wizard so that they can fill it in on their phone and everything. But our transaction coordinators are not sending them this advisory. And this advisory is really, really important. And it talks about their disclosure obligations and how to fill out these forms. It's very helpful. Now, let's suppose you're representing a buyer. Of course, you want to share any seller disclosures you get before you write the offer, okay? Even if you are the only one writing, even if there is going to be a contingency. You don't want to write the offer if there's something in the disclosures that the buyer might want to not write the offer anymore. Like, the house needs $350,000 worth of work. They might decide they don't want to write anymore. Number 2, we provide great value add with number 2. Which seller disclosures haven't been provided that are legally required and that we would typically expect? I can't tell you how many times in the last 2 years I've been working with a buyer and I said, okay, we've got a disclosure package, but it's missing. Number 1, HOA docs. Number 2, there's no prelim. Number 3, there's no NHD report. Number 4, they didn't do any inspections. I'm talking to my buyers about that all the time because it impacts how they're going to craft the offer. you would be committing realtor malpractice. You would be a bad fiduciary if you didn't have a contingency for missing documents. Even if having a contingency would make your offer feel weak to you as an agent, you can't tell your buyer not to, you can't take away protections of such a critical nature. Well, of course, let me rephrase that. The risk is your buyer's to take. So if you go to the buyer and you say, hey, listen, you want to write non-contingent, just keep in mind that you are missing a huge piece of the puzzle. I cannot recommend that you waive your right to look at the HOA docs, for example. I can't recommend that you waive your right to look at a natural hazard report or the prelim. Any one of these three documents missing could blow up a deal if you knew what was in it. For example, missing HOA docs, you might find out that they are going to have a special assessment of $50,000 a unit. We don't know right now. So are you really prepared to write an offer without knowing that? Or number two, the prelim might show that that the seller has some sort of lien or commitment against the property that would make it impossible for them to close escrow, which just happened to somebody in one of our offices very recently. They were in contract and they discovered an item on the prelim and the seller can't close because the item can't be cleared before closing.
So contingency was there.
The contingency was there and they got out of it. But if the lesson here is you want to know that before you write the offer. You know, the buyer gets all excited, they get into contract, they're excited, and then everybody finds out that this was not was a showstopper issue. Okay, prelims are confusing, right? I have a whole class on how to evaluate a prelim. If you read a prelim on behalf of your seller or your buyer and you don't understand one of the exceptions, one of the numbered items, talk to your mentor, find out what it is, ask escrow, and then find out if it's going to be a potential showstopper. Okay, number 4, I talked about this a lot already. You want your buyer to review the package carefully and ask you questions. Okay, and then number 5, make sure you discuss the contract. Those 2 sections I showed you. How long the seller has to provide the reports and how long your buyer needs a contingency for review of those reports.
Does it happen like, okay, seller was supposed to, there is a contingency and seller was supposed to provide the disclosure link or the documents, but during that time frame he did not, even after
5 days?
issuing NTA. Yeah.
Oh, well, so there's a whole process for when one party doesn't do what the contract says. So in the case of failure to deliver disclosures, if the buyer doesn't get them in the time frame of, let's say the example we had was 17 days, then the buyer can send the seller a notice to seller to perform. Mr. Seller, you're in breach of the contract. You were supposed to get these to us by 17 days. Okay, we didn't get them at all. Please give them to us within 3 days or we are going to arbitrarily cancel this contract. It's written into the contract, that language. So the buyer's right would be to cancel the contract. Question, does the buyer get their deposit back if they cancel that way?
Yes. I mean, if the seller does not perform as per the contingency, then buyer get the money back.
That's right. Buyer gets their deposit back, even though buyer is arbitrarily canceling.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's a little bit off topic today, but the question was a good one. All right, so that is the extent of what I wanted to talk about with these packages. Remember, we have a fiduciary duty to prepare a professional full package, and we have a fiduciary duty as a buyer's agent to make sure the package we get is full and complete, right? And you know, you're going to get experience. So over years, you will begin to develop a really good eye for how to read these things and know what is typically red flag issues or things that you want your buyers to be aware of. And it isn't necessarily bad things. Like one of the things I like to bring to my buyers' attention is how much their property taxes are going to be and whether they're likely to have a special assessment for property taxes after closing, all of which they might gloss over when they do their review. I like to bring to my clients' attention if the NHD shows the property is in any zone. And so they're at least aware of it more than, because gotta remember, guys, these are hundreds of pages. And it's very hard for people to not feel overwhelmed by it. So part of the role we can bring to the table is to highlight things that they may have missed in their own review. Any questions from those of you on the Zoom?
But I'm wondering for highlighting, there's just so much. Like if you highlight some but not all, then are you gonna get in trouble for
So,
not
well,
mentioning
no.
certain things?
So there's no way you're gonna mention everything, and there's no way that, so you can't I mean, you ask your buyers what's important to them. You draw out things that you find important. You know, you're new, so you might want to have your mentor help with that, right? The mentor can help you figure out things that the mentor usually looks for in a, like, I mean, I'm happy to sit with anyone and do a walk through a disclosure package with them, you know, and help them to sort of see it the way I see it. I'm happy to do that with any of you, to schedule a meeting with me. But yeah, you might not highlight something that it might be of importance later, but all we can do, Melanie, is reduce the risk, right? The very minimum standard is you make sure as a buyer's agent that there's nothing that's legally obligated to be in the pack. Don't assume that the listing agent is competent. The listing agent may be completely competent. They may be a great agent. But don't assume that they don't make mistakes and don't do things wrong. Because believe it or not, guys, they do. There are many agents out there who get listings who are not as well trained as you guys are, who have not been taught this stuff, and they're winging it, and they might make mistakes. They don't have good brokers who are very thorough and make sure we don't miss stuff like you guys do. So I wish I could say, Melanie, that we could reduce all the risk, but all we do is the best we can do in good faith, looking out for our clients' best interests. Any other
Okay,
questions?
thank you.
Of course. No? Okay. So on the screen is the QR code I promised before. This QR code will take you to a Google form where you can answer just a few simple questions. And my assistant will send you this slide deck. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I appreciate it. And unless anyone has any other questions, I'm going to end the Zoom.
Disclosure, the good, bad, and
Yeah,
ugly.
that's the class. Disclosure packages, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
What happened here? Here we go.